أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone joining us on the Zoom platform this evening. And likewise, welcome to everyone joining us on the Facebook platform this evening. And before we commence, we have a special guest tonight, esteemed colleague, friend, scholar, sheikh, and guest, who I'll introduce in a moment. But before I do that, I would just like to confirm our usual checks with our admin, Abdurrahman, if the video and the sound is clear. And once he gives a go-ahead, we can then commence with our discourse and our procedures tonight, inshallah.
Yes, Sheikh, the video and the sound is clear.
Okay, shukran for that. So tonight we will take a break from our regular classes, which are the Jawhara of Imam Laqani, as well as our tafsir on Surah Fatiha based on the Mafatih al-Ghaib, keys to the unseen of Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, because we have a colleague and a guest and a scholar who is, in my opinion, a gift to the English-speaking world. He is the founder of Making Sense of Islam and offers amazing courses, which I myself have been privileged to attend and benefited from tremendously. And he has spent years before, and I'm not saying this just for the sake of saying it, but before some of the foremost scholars of Islam that has walked this earth and are living in our day and age. Amongst them is Sidi Sheikh Ali Juma, and we don't need to elaborate on his status. He is all of our sheikhs, and tonight Shaykh Tarek is one of my teachers as well. I respect him dearly. I'm greatly honored that he is here to share a few words with us. I won't drag my introduction further. Everyone listens to me every week. So I'm taking a break this week, and I'm going to sit with you as students before our teacher, Dr. Shaykh Tarek Elgawhary, to allow him to enlighten us, and he will then explain his course later on and offer that to you as well. So without further ado, Shaykh Dr. Tarek Elgawhary, the platform is yours, and we are before you as students. Barakallahu feekum. May this be a blessed gathering, inshallah ta'ala.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. A special thanks to my dear brother, my colleague, my friend, Sidi Shaykh Ali Khalfi, for always extending the invitation to be with you. And I pray that inshallah everyone in your community is doing well, is staying safe. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and your community for all of the hard work that you do on behalf of the entire English-speaking Muslim international community. So jazakumullahu khair al-jazaa. I wanted to share some thoughts with you this evening on this topic that is of great concern to me, which is what I call the complexity of the modern world. When I was trying to build my platform, Making Sense of Islam, I first began by thinking, what are my principles? What are my key teachings that if I had students, whether they be private students or public students, and even my own children, what are the key principles that I would want to pass on to them? Of course, we hope that our children learn the faith and they practice the faith, but there have to be these key core principles. And I put these together in what is really a living document. Right now, there are 7 core principles. They're called the Core 7 because of lack of my creativity. You can download them for free on my website. But I wanted to take one of those principles and share them with you because I think it's really of importance, whether you be a student of sacred knowledge, whether you be a practicing Muslim or just a conscious Muslim in the day and age in which we live, and you are concerned about the things that are around you. What do I mean by the complexity of the modern world? If you look at some of the early modern works by some of the ulama, ulama that specifically lived in the first half of the 19th century. I'm thinking here of the likes of Ibrahim al-Bayjuri, who was at one point in time Shaykh al-Azhar. I'm also thinking of Shaykh Ibn Abidin, who is the author of the famous Hashiyat al-Abidin in the Hanafi madhab. These are people that occupied the first half of the 19th century. So let's say from, roughly from 1800 to 1850. Those aren't exact dates, but for the sake of argument, let's just say 1800 to 1850. When you read their works, whether they be works of law or whether they be works of rhetoric or logic or ilm kalam, aqidah, whatever it may be, there is a contiguous relationship that they have with the early Muslim community in the following way. Their worldview, the world that they occupied, the way that they lived their lives was more or less the same as the life of the Sahaba and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They ate the same types of food. They wore the same types of clothes. They occupied the same types of dwellings. They used the same types of transportation, etc., etc., etc. But around the beginning of the 1850s, when the residual effects of the Industrial Revolution in Europe hit the heartland of the Muslim world, that was to change rapidly. No longer were the food the same, transportation the same, buildings the same, warfare the same, clothing the same. Now we have a new reality. And we are the children of that, or the great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren of that reality. Up until the middle of the 1850s, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ until that time, one could talk about something that is called the Islamic civilization. That Islam was not just a religion, but Islam was a civilization. That all parts of life, all parts of thought, all parts of society at large were in some way, shape, or form directly linked to the revelation of the Quran and the guidance of the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So not only do we speak about it as a religion, but we can speak about it as a civilization. Another way of saying that is the overarching paradigm for large parts of the Muslim majority world were regulated by what you could call the Muslim mind or the Muslim paradigm. But with the advent of both Enlightenment thinking, which is a very important corollary to my discussion this evening, but I won't have really much time to get into that. Maybe we can talk about that later. But it's very important to understand the rise of Enlightenment thinking and the works of people like Francis Bacon and Descartes and Kant and others for how it's going to impact modern Europe and then after that as an influence modern America and its derivatives. That thought started influencing global politics, plus the machine of the Industrial Revolution, the machine of industry, has now altered major centers of Muslim lands, such that there is now a bifurcation between Islam as a civilization and Islam as a religion. I mean, alhamdulillah, we still have Islam as a religion, we practice. However, we find ourselves practicing our faith in the quote-unquote modern world. No longer are we necessarily practicing our Islam in an environment, under a paradigm or a rubric that is dominated by Islamic teachings. The rhythm of day-to-day life started to change. The way people dressed started to change, the foods that they ate, the activities that they engaged in. I'll give you a simple example. The time. Muslim time, and I don't mean by that what we mean today that Muslims are always late. I mean Muslim time in the pre-modern world was set a certain way. It was attuned to Salatul Dhuhr every day, or Salatul Fajr, or Maghrib, but it was adjusted every day to the rhythms of the prayer. So when you read the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that talks about the first hour of Friday, the second hour of Friday, etc., you understand that if you're a pre-modern Muslim, because that time was like. But now we have our time is different. The central time that we use, GMT, and then the plus and the minuses that we use, this alternates the actual time of day. So no longer do we know the times of prayer or the times of day simply by how many hours have passed from Salat al-Dhuhr, for example. But now we have to have timetables, or we have to have apps, and we have to have calendars to tell us when it is time to pray, when the imsak is for Ramadan, when it's time to break the fast in Ramadan, etc. That's a tremendous trauma and impact that the Muslims had to go through in the mid-1850s and then onwards, as they had to adjust to quote-unquote modernity. Now, if you listen to what I've said up until now, I can see how many people would conclude that this is a negative, this is a bad thing. And I don't necessarily see it that way. I see it simply as it's a reality that we have to deal with. It's a haqiqah. It's something that is true, but we must address it. There are some things to lament, for sure. We did lose certain things. The idea of Islam as a religion and civilization, and now Islam as a religion trying to survive in a predominantly non-Eastern, non-Islamic civilization, there is some awkwardness in that. But I don't necessarily see it as negative, because the Prophet ﷺ told us that the ummah is like water. We do not know which of it is good, its beginning or its end, meaning that there will always be khair, there will always be good in the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, inshallah, until the end of time. So I tend to be optimistic, but it's very important that we understand that that is something that we must deal with as we seek to bridge our knowledge of right now to the knowledge of our past. Now, because of this gap, it's very easy to see how people can get it wrong, and it's also easy to see how people can get it right. There is a gap that now exists. If I read the books of Imam al-Bayjuri, for example, and I use him as an example because he's actually one of the books and references that I use and I teach, he'll talk about the distance from Cairo to a certain city in the Delta as not being the distance of travel, therefore you cannot do jama' and qasr when you pray. But if you put those two cities in Google Earth now, the mileage or the kilometer will show you that it is in excess of the distance of travel. So what's the disconnect? Well, the disconnect is that after he wrote those words, we have pavements and we have roads. So no longer do you travel on the banks of the Nile River up until the Delta, but now you're taking another path. And if you actually take that path today, it is a distance of travel. I mean, these are just very small examples that come to my mind to show you, if these are simple examples, you can only imagine what the bigger implications are of the modern way of thinking. And this is really why I launched my platform, not only with my principles, but with this course, The Muslim Mind. I had advertised before the talk that I was going to give away free passes, and I'm going to tell you now, inshallah, how I'm going to do that before I continue my presentation, and then I'd like to hear from you. So what I would like to do is that for the first 10 people to follow the Making Sense of Islam Instagram page, and if you've already followed it, then you can share a story or share one of the posts. I will see that in the history. I will DM you. I will ask for your email address, and then I will set you up with a free pass for the Muslim Mind course. It's a $50 US dollar course. So I'd like to give away 10 of those passes, inshallah, today. It's the afternoon where I am, but evening where most of you are. So please do that now. After we end, when I review my Instagram account, I will be able to find the first 10 people, and I will gladly extend that to you, inshallah. The second half of what I want to say about this complexity is we're not the only people to talk about this from within the family of Islam. There have been many people since, the early part of the middle of the 19th century onwards that have sought to respond to this type of phenomena. And I want to outline for you 4 very broad responses that Muslims have had, which is very, very important, especially for us to know, for us to understand Islam and Muslims today. Not everyone that speaks in the name of Islam, not everyone that teaches Islam, unfortunately, is coming from the same vantage point. And it's very important to understand where you can categorize these people. The first response is, whoa, this is crazy. This is really bad. This is very negative. We have to go back in time to the early generation of Islam, when Islam was pure and clean. The reason we're not able to keep up now is because we have all this medieval scholastic mumbo jumbo. We have all these madhahib, and we have all these aqidah works and mantiq and ash'ari and maturidi, and that, I don't want any of that. I just want qala Allah wa qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I just want Quran and Sunnah. And these are the seeds of the Salafi type of response. The fundamentalist response is that the reason we can't keep up with Europe has nothing to do with the fact that they put steel on ships and now ships are indestructible and they have factories. That's not the problem. The problem is we shackled ourselves with overthinking. Let's go back to a simple Islam. So what, and of course I'm oversimplifying, and I mean I don't mean to offend anybody, but I think it's clear that that's a very flawed approach, because you just, you just erase like 1,000 years of Muslim intellectual history, in one stroke. But that general response, till today, people still have that. We want to go back in time, back to the golden era, to this nostalgic era of the Salaf as-Salih. So that's one type of response. The other type of response is almost like its opposite, which is, yeah, I agree with you that the reason we're in this mess, the reason we are unable to keep up, the reason that we are behind, etc., is because we've inherited bad things from the past. We've inherited a ossified Islam. We need to change and reform Islam. We need to change it. We need to update it. If the Prophet ﷺ was alive today, he would dress like this and he would say this and he would do that. And you hear these type of arguments. And these are the modernists or the reforming. And I say reform because sometimes in the English language, a reformer sounds sort of positive, but in this context, it's not. It's really a form of deconstructing. But they want to reform Islam. So they will forget about things like ijma' and forget about the madhahib and forget about all that stuff. Let's just make Islam modern. Let's secularize Islam. Let's neuter Islam. Let us sterilize Islam so that it fits in with the modern way. So there's the fundamentalist response, then there's the modernist, reformist response, and then there's a third response, which is not as popular, but it still existed and exists amongst certain people, which is the messianic response. This is the end of time. Everything is coming to an end. And the reason, sometimes I refer to it as the Mahdiist response, because there were Mahdi movements where people claimed to be the Mahdi. Obviously they were not, and they were proven not to be. But why would somebody in the last 200 years, why were there so many claims of Mahdis over the last 200 years? And there have been claims, to be fair, in the past, but because it's a type of response. There's a psychology that we have that we know things will end. There is the, أخبرني عن أماراتها. Gabriel asked the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith of Gabriel, tell me about the signs of the final hour. And the Prophet ﷺ, goes on to tell him some of the signs. So that's part of our body of theology, is what will happen at the end of the as-samayat. What are the things that we were told by the Prophet ﷺ that will happen at the end of time? So one of those responses is, well, it must be happening now. Things are so crazy. Things are so bad. It's the end of time. And it's sort of almost like a cultish response where people retract into these small groups and sort of just give up and just sort of, and there'll be like a charismatic leader, and they'll follow this leader, and sometimes they'll do insane things like invading the Haram in Mecca, like Juhayman. And there were these messianic Mahdi claims at that time. Those are three, and I like to add a fourth, which is what I call the usuli response, which is a response based on first principles, which is essentially what I'm trying to articulate. Yes, there is a new reality. There is a new way of thinking. There is a way of thinking now in which the relative is much more important than the absolute. Up until Enlightenment thinking, Muslim thinkers and at least European, primarily Christian thinkers and philosophers, at least they could agree on the concept of the absolute and the divine and creation and all of that, if nothing else. But now there is man meaning men and women, but there is man as the measure of all knowledge. And that's essentially what one of Francis Bacon's, in his new logic, when he tries to supplant Aristotelian logic. Don't forget that our logic is essentially a morph of Aristotle's logic. It's not all of it, but we are Aristotelian in our logical outlook. It is to undo that. And therefore, we are the measure of truth. And it is this wave of reality. Okay, so the usuli response is, I acknowledge that. Let us go back to the first principles. Let us go back to our usul. Let us go back to the first rules and the first principles that the formative people had, people like Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam al-Shafi'i and Imam Malik and al-Awza'i and al-Layth, etc., 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 and then all of the luminaries after them, to remind ourselves once again, what are those principles, and then derive from those principles meanings in light of our new reality. And the reason I articulate it that way is that that's hard. It's easy to go into the past. It's easy to just change things you don't like. It's easy to lock yourself, in a room with a cult or in a cave. It's very hard to be a thinking Muslim and say, no, I believe in the message of Islam, but I also believe that we need to interpret based on our primary interpretive methodology in light of modern realities. And that's why many of the usuli scholars, many of the people that sought to engage in ijtihad, and look, not every mujtahid is right. That's why we have a whole literature of hadith about the reward that the mujtahid gets for making a mistake. So we know that Imam al-Daraqutni, for example, he narrates a hadith that if a mujtahid is wrong, he gets 1 reward, and if he's right, he gets 10 rewards. And other hadith related like that. That's difficult. But many of these usuli scholars from all walks of life, not just in the Arab world, but in the Indian subcontinent and elsewhere, they have likened our predicament to the predicament of the early Muslims. They see the similarities. There was no usul al-fiqh articulated until Imam al-Shafi'i wrote his Risala. And then everyone else started writing, we need to articulate our usul al-fiqh. It wasn't like a given. You couldn't go to the library and grab a book and read it and study it with a sheikh. You had to invent and articulate that discipline. That's very much where we find ourselves today. And that's why it's a tremendous opportunity. We have the opportunity to actually, for lack of a better word, live the way that the Salaf lived, but not live in their time. We have the opportunity to use our intellect, to use our reason, to use what we were taught from our tradition and our precedent without violating any of the tradition, but have an Islam that is compatible with our modern realities. And that is a lot of hard work, because not only do you need to know Islam, you also need to know the modern reality. And a lot of Muslim thinkers, unfortunately, they fail on the latter. They don't have a good grasp on how life is like now. They make assumptions, many of which are false. So my message to you is the following. Number one, it's important to acknowledge that we do live in this very weird situation for the last couple hundred years, that this is one of the main obstacles that we have to understanding our faith tradition, making sense of it, applying it, and living it. Yes, you could rightfully argue that that's bad, but rather than do that and look at it as a negative, I think it's more healthy to look at it as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to do the things that Imam Abu Hanifa did, to do the things that Imam al-Shafi'i did, to do the things that Imam as-Suyuti did. And, the list goes, those are just like my favorites, and Imam al-Razi and Imam al-Ghazali and all of the great ulama of the past. Those are my friends. Those are the people I like to think about the most. But, anybody in the past, there's too many to enumerate. It's an opportunity to actually do what they've done. And that is how Islam is passed from generation to generation. It was done all the time, but because life was like the same, more or less, it was an agrarian-based society, pre-modern, pre-industry, pre-enlightenment. There wasn't that much to think about. It was just further articulating the stuff that we've inherited from the past. But now there is this rapid change. If we don't do this, then Islam is going to be more difficult for our children than it was for us. And our Islam, in many respects, is more difficult for us than it was for our parents. And this is where a lot of the uneasiness and awkwardness comes sometimes being a Muslim in the modern world. Hence, I come back to the course, The Muslim Mind. The reason I put it together is I think it's a helpful way to have some, pride in the way that we think and pride in the way we do things, and that there's nothing weird about it, but there's a way that we can express it through the modern paradigm, through modern language, that can help other people as well, rather than us just seemingly to be odd in the modern world. Anyway, I'll leave my brief presentation there. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. I will get my laptop ready, and I would absolutely love to hear from you if there are questions or comments about what I've stated, or anything that's on your mind. Again, thank you very much for your time and attention, and I really do appreciate this opportunity to be with you.
Okay, the first question that came through, I don't know if it's directly related to the actual topic, but the question is, studying the Islamic studies in a place like the Azhar, is there a difference sitting at the university in classrooms versus sitting in the mosque at the feet of the sheikhs there, or is it better to combine both? Because most of us coming from the West, we don't have the aptitude and the ability to sit at both places. So what is your response, and what do you recommend?
So two things. One, the real deal is the real deal. It's sitting with the mashayikh and benefiting from their company, learning from them, observing how they live their lives in the classroom and outside the classroom. Nothing can substitute that. That is how the Sahaba learned from the Prophet ﷺ, and then the subsequent generations thereafter. The second point is, it depends what you need for your life. If you are going to go back to a Muslim majority country, or in a system in which you need the actual paperwork of the university, then you're going to have to find a way to juggle the two. But if you are setting out to learn, fi sabilillah, not concerned about the paperwork, but just really wanting to learn, you are going to learn more from the mujalasa. You're going to learn more from sitting with the mashayikh. I can't even begin to describe to you all what that experience is like. The only thing that I can find in the modern world to liken it is, it's exactly the feeling of stepping on platform 9 3/4 and entering into this magical world of Harry Potter. I mean, it really is like that. You find out that there's a whole nother world parallel to the world that we live in now, that you never even knew existed, but it's right there. It's just behind this, facade. You just never realized it was there. And that is something that you cannot write about, you cannot really talk about, you can only experience it. You can only be there and take that in with your being. It's learning with all of your senses, and it's a positive assault on your heart. It is to surround yourself in an environment that is so pure, that is so connected. It almost brings tears to the eyes just to think about it. So nothing will take that experience away. No university, no classroom. That does not mean that there's no khair in the university or the nizami system of learning. We have to, have that. We have to have degrees. But sitting with the mashayikh is how you learn. It's how you learn how to read, how to interpret, how to reconcile differences, how to be a mercy to other people. Many people study the Sharia and they're like mean and rude. They forget that the first hadith we learn is the hadith of rahmah. We are meant to be merciful, the way that the Prophet ﷺ was merciful. You only see that when you see somebody who embodies that and then lives side by side with them long enough to see how they implement it. So if you're going to Egypt, by all means, make an effort, no matter how difficult it might be, make the sacrifice of time, of money, of sleep, to be with the mashayikh. Somebody asked, is it wrong to have an ideology of like we are in the end of time and the Mahdi is going to come to make everything better? We do believe that the Mahdi will come. The hadith about the Mahdi are mutawatir. There's no doubt about that. It's part of our belief system. But it's haram for us to sit and wait for all of that stuff to happen. We have to live our life, the moment that we have, to the best ability. This moment that we have right now, we are obliged to make it the most, the max, the best, the most beautiful moment of our lives. The Prophet ﷺ never said park and wait for the Mahdi. When the Mahdi comes, if we are alive at that time, he needs somebody to work with. He needs institutes and people that are ready. So you can't just sit around. It's not like a, Captain Marvel movie or something like that. The Mahdi is going to sweep in. No, it's going to be a struggle, and the Mahdi is going to be an actual person, and he's going to need actual assistance and help. If you're not the best version of yourself, you're going to be useless when the Mahdi comes. And that will be even worse. Many people that study end of time stuff, what we call eschatology, the stuff that will happen at the end of time and beyond this earthly life, many of them assume that we are just to sit around and wait for that stuff to happen. And that is haram. The Prophet ﷺ forbade us from doing that, but rather told us to live each moment to the max.
Shaykh, the second question here, which comes from, it says here, I really like your explanation of the change in the Muslim in the time we are living in. Is there any place where there is a thorough explanation or a more detailed explanation of what you spoke about earlier? And I think that's right up the alley of what your idea is here, to get students to participate and listen to your to the course that you've designed. So basically, is there a more thorough explanation with more details?
I believe there's a Western book about Muslim time and calendars. Its name escapes me, so I need to spend an afternoon trying to track that down. But basically, there are two ideas. One idea is the daily time. Every time Dhuhr comes in, we're going to set the clock to 12. So therefore, we have a demarcation of midday, because Dhuhr in the Sharia is the movement of the sun from the very topmost, the topmost of the sky towards its descent in the west. It is what we say in English, high noon. High noon means it is exactly noon with the world around us. Dhuhr time now can come in at any time. Sometimes it comes in at 11:50, or in the summer it's like at 1:15. It's all over the place, because the time is not adjusted to the astronomic phenomena. So there's an adjusting. And up until recently, maybe even now, in the Haram in Mecca and Medina, there are still some clocks in the Haram that are based on that old time. Sometimes you go, you think the clock is broken. It's not broken, it represents the old time. And then there is, of course, the monthly cycle of the lunar months. So you don't know if this month is going to be 29 days or 30. So at the end of each month, you have to wait for the announcement if it's the new moon. So there's that issue. And then the lunar months have nothing to do with the seasons. So that's also a different situation. If you're a farmer, you can't use the lunar calendar. You have to use the solar calendar. And Imam al-Suyuti, he talks about the solar or the Coptic calendar to be the most accurate for farming. So Muslims always were able to use these multiple systems. But of course, if there were official records, or there was like a diwan in the Sultan or something like that, the record that would be kept is, the Muharram, Safar, Rabi al-Awwal months, and you have to anticipate that. And of course, the timings of the day to help understand, to link time to the prayer time. But I'll find that book's name and I'll send it over to you, inshallah.
Sheikh, the next question is, in what sense is our modern time or world complex compared to our Muslim ancestors?
How is it complex?
Yeah, in what sense is our modern time complex, so complex compared to the time of the Sahaba and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam?
I don't know if it's right to look at it that way. I think every age they have their challenge. I don't think anything was more traumatic than the Mongol sacking of Baghdad and the fleeing of the caliphs to North Africa. Or I can't imagine anything to be more traumatic than the horrible massacre of Imam al-Hussein and Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, and having to deal with Yazid. I mean, alhamdulillah, he only ruled for 3 years, but I mean those are probably the worst 3 years ever. So it's a modern way of thinking to look in the past and say, oh, they had it so good or so simple and we're so complicated. No, each generation has their challenge. Our obligation is to rise and to meet that challenge, to tackle it full on, together as a community, and find a way forward. That's what the Salaf did. That's what the Sahaba did. And that's why Allah Ta'ala blessed them. Our problem is that we are surrounded with complacency, and we are sort of, this onslaught of consumerism and this onslaught of modernism and relativity. And, that's our challenge, is to shut out that noise and do something that is constructive. So I don't look at it like, oh, life was so simple. Life was not simple. You'd have to wake up at the crack of dawn, and you'd have to go fetch water, and you'd have to make a fire. And I mean, that's not easy. Now you can do all of those things by pushing a button, literally. So there are some things that are easier for us than was for them, but there are some things that are difficult for us. So let us look to those challenges.
Okay, Sheikh, the next is more a comment and a compliment. It says, Salams, dear Sheikh, I love what you said about sitting with the mashayikh and being part of an environment of mercy, exchanging rahmah with one another. Also that the uncertainty of our time is providing us unique opportunities, and request du'as and supplications and prayers from you for us so we may be better equipped and full of responsibility. The next question is from Shireen. And I think, if I may, I can add a 2 seconds into this here. Basically, she's asking what opportunities does the Azhar have for females coming from around the world to sit there? Do they have access to the mashayikh in Egypt, and how much opportunity is presented for women? So before you answer, Sheikh, I'm sure you have a wealth of experience with that. I just have had 2 experiences there. One is with the Shaykh Fathi Abdurrahman Al-Hijazi. I'm sure we all know him very well. And I had a guest from Johannesburg, 2 females there, and also some of my students and their parents. And I took them into the Azhar to meet him. And they were very shy because the customs are different here and over there. But to their shock, Shaykh Abdurrahman Fathi Hijazi covered his hand, and he extended his hand with his cloak to greet them. And that was the humility that they saw at the Azhar, that this great colossus of knowledge is coming here and extending out his hand to welcome them in. And one more thing I experienced with lots of the mashayikh there, particularly Dr. Sheikh Hisham Kamil, was that he made specific room for the females and the males. And in one Nahu class, grammar class, no males were allowed to read the Nas, the text. The females read the text and he did the commentary. But that's just 2 experiences. I'll leave it to you to elaborate and explain further.
Yeah, that was my experience as well, and continues to be my experience. When I studied in the Rawaq, there were girls with us, and we used to sit side by side in the sense that one half of the room was guys and one half of the room was girls, usually, or sometimes front and back, depending on how big the room was. I didn't mean side by side like right next to you, but you know what I mean, segregated, but equally accessible to the sheikh. And that's important because women tend to be better students than the guys. So we need to make sure that they're being educated because we have a lot of hope with you women, inshallah. And you make your way. Yes, the mashayikh are accessible because Egyptian culture is not conservative in that sense. It is conservative, but it still allows the access of women. And that is the culture also of Al-Azhar and most of the mashayikh. So there's nothing wrong, but you just have to grab that. You're not going to be, the shaykh's like 20-year companion by him asking you to do that. You have to fight for that, whether you're a guy or you're a girl. So remember that when you go, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to seek out these things, but they do try to accommodate. I'm sure they can do a better job with facilities. My teachers, they used to teach in the ancient buildings because the ancient buildings are not from a fiqh point of view not considered mosques. They're considered schools, so there's no restriction for women to come if they're on their monthly cycle, for example. So those are little signs that's how we were taught, that's why they would choose those mosques. I mean, we refer to them as mosques, but why they would choose those locations for their classes to make sure that women could always attend. So yes, that's there, and you grab it and you go for it, inshallah.
Okay, Sheikh, we have two more questions here. One is from Facebook, one of the females on Facebook. The question is, have our jurisprudence kept up with developments in the modern world, like economics, technology, bioethics, and so forth and so on?
So yes, these usuli scholars that I referred to and the centers that they occupy and the academic and scholarly output that they produce have taken into consideration all of these things. One of my teachers, he wrote an 800-page thesis on fiat currency, on paper money. I don't know how you can do that on such a subject, but he did. So these are not people that don't know what's going on. But no one reads this stuff because it's very high academic, scholarly writing, and there's a gap that exists, and I think that's natural between the ulama and sort of the common understanding. And one of the things that we can do is we can be those bridges to help dilute some of this information to make them more popular. I have never come across any issue in the modern world that I have not found somebody from my teachers or their teachers or the generation before them that they have talked about, tackled, and handled. Our problem is not necessarily our inability to respond. One of our problems is that information doesn't arrive where it needs to arrive, as I've mentioned. The other problem, I think, is more paradigmatic, which is what I was trying to talk about earlier and about the Muslim Mind course, is that we have a paradigm around the world that is not 100% compatible with our paradigm. But that paradigm, unbeknownst to us, subconsciously even, has become our paradigm. And we start to look at Islam through that paradigm. And that's where the real work needs to. We need to remind ourselves that there are certain things that are immutable for us, that the Quran is divine, that the revelation, that the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is protected and also of divine origin. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. That there is this idea of ijma', of consensus of the ummah, that the agreement of the mujtahids is protected by the text of the Prophet, so on and so forth. These are things that don't work in the modern world because the modern world wants to make everything relative. Your Islam, my Islam, her Islam, we all have Islam, that kind of attitude. So that's where the real issue, where the real deficiency is and where we need to add value, not in responding. Yeah, we have responses for all these things.
Shaykh, the next question from Zaid is that many young Muslims on university identify with feminism and call themselves Muslim feminists. Is feminism compatible with Islam?
I mean, again, this is a good example. All these isms, they're going to have certain meanings behind them. So rather than phrasing the question like that, let us look at it from another way. What does our faith tradition teach us about the genders? And remind ourselves of the advocacy that Allah and His Prophet, before us, Allah and His Prophet ﷺ made, and it stands because of the revelation and the sunnah being protected, continued for the rights of women. So I don't like to follow other isms, because eventually you're going to find something that just doesn't work on a paradigmatic level. If what we mean by feminism is the advocating for the rights of women, protecting women, empowering women, educating women, having women, equal pay, equal opportunities. This is before feminism and all of the isms. This is what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي. The best of you are those who are good to their women, and I am the best of you to their women. That the Islam has accepted the narration of the woman in matters of religion. There is no higher honor than that. Our religion is transmitted by transmitters, men and women. And of all of the women who transmitted Islam, none were known to be weak transmitters. So if a woman can narrate authority in religion, then there's nothing that she can't really do, except if there's some specific hadith or ayah about that. Now, our societies are patriarchal. That's a problem. We've missed the mark. Then we need to go back, and we need, again, the usuli approach. What happened here? What are our principles? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدًّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Allah's signs is that He's created from each one of us, men and female, our soulmate, so that we may find that soulmate and dwell therein with peace and tranquility. Where is that meaning? What happened to that meaning? Why do we mistreat women? If Allah Ta'ala Himself directs His speech in this manner to say that this is from one of His signs, that you find the love of your life, your soulmate, that you build a family with this person, and then you have peace and tranquility between us. So how can I be that person, claim to follow the Prophet ﷺ, and then mistreat my women? So that's our, I don't want to say that's our feminism, because again, eventually we're going to come into some paradigmatic problem with any ism, which is another, concept altogether. But of course, we must revert back to our first principles and remind ourselves of that importance. I think many women, young women who are Muslim young women who are attracted to that, are responding to the injustice that they see in our community that men place on women, and they are 100% justified in being, quite frankly, pissed off that men do this to women. Men do not have the right to mistreat women. Men do not have the right to abuse women, to hit women, to curse women. Rather, our job is to create an environment where we can all thrive. But because it's very easy for men to encroach on the rights of women, yes, we need to articulate that for ourselves and connect it to our first principles so that we are reminded of this.
Shukran for the detailed response, Sheikh. I think we have just under 15 minutes left. So
Okay.
10 minutes for you and about 3 minutes for me to mention a conclusion, a short dua. You mentioned that you were giving away some free tickets or opportunities for students to join the cause. But I'm going to leave the next 10 minutes to you. I'm going to stop the questions coming forth now so that you can share a conclusion.
There seems to be a long question. Should we answer that quickly?
A long question to be answered quickly. Okay. I'm sure we can. Okay. The question reads, Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Shukr to Allah, and I thank you for having open this platform. From my limited research, I found during the 1800s, because of infiltration, the Caliphate was broken down by splitting life and religion incrementally. I feel that we cannot go back too far in basics, where we have to work through so much information that great scholars have already done. My view is that we should find ways to make the greater population join modern life and Islam instead of living with these separately. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these points.
That's exactly what I said. So you just summarized everything that I just said in your own language. That's exactly what I'm advocating, and that's exactly what the usuli approach is of Islam. That's what we continue to do, to link our principles to modern realities, to find a way that we express our faith that is true to the precedent and to the Quran and Sunnah, but also it takes into consideration modern reality. That's exactly what we're talking about. So thank you for summarizing that.
Okay, Now we have 10 minutes left, Sheikh. So it's over to you. Is there any final remarks you would like to share and more about your course that's offered? I've done the course and it's a brilliant course. I've learned, um, it allows you to think out of the box, for one. It will definitely empower you as a Muslim living in the modern world. But I appreciate if you share and encourage us a bit more to take up one of the courses that you offer.
So this presentation is really just scratching the surface. This is obviously a much larger issue that has a whole series of derivative issues afterwards. And like the last questioner asked, there's no point of making things more complicated. The Muslim Mind Course is a way to help you understand, using modern, simple English language, how is it that this paradigm of Islam works? What does it entail? How does it function? And in many instances, I give references to modern examples. A lot of my examples might be American because I'm an American. But I think that American culture, because of our cinema and Hollywood, I think it's understood. So nothing too specific. But I think it's important because you have to remember, I am a Westerner just like I am an Easterner. I lived my whole life as a minority in the Washington, D.C. area, except for the time I spent at Al-Azhar. And of course, I continue to travel when I can to visit my teachers and my family. But I do occupy most of the year in North America. So I know what it's like to live in a society that is dominated by a paradigm that is not necessarily mine. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's important to know where to draw the limits and what the differences are. So this course is hopefully helpful. I have other courses that are coming that are more along a wellness track, as that's one of the issues that I am hoping to add to my principles, the importance of wellness and mindfulness for the modern Muslim. I'm trying to break a little bit out of like the seminary stereotype with my platform and my teaching to try to help distill the stuff that I learned. You don't have to go through the trouble that I did to learn it, but in a way that inshallah people can just take it and run with it and hopefully directly improve their lives.
Okay, Sheikh, is there anything you would like to add, final few words from us before I say a thanks to you and to everyone who attended the Zoom class and the Facebook platform?
Thank you, Ali, for the opportunity, and Allah bless you and your community and your teachers. I hope that can come to South Africa soon. It's definitely been on my list of things to do, places to go. So I ask Allah Ta'ala to bless you all, your family, and I hope that this was beneficial. I hope it gets you thinking a little bit, inshallah, and I welcome the opportunity that we can discuss further issues like this in the future, inshallah. I'm at your service.
Okay, from our side here in Cape Town, the Islamic Text Institute and everyone involved, everyone on the Facebook platform, on the Zoom platform, we have about 45 students on Zoom and a lot on Facebook who can still benefit later from it. Thank you, Shaykh, from the bottom of our hearts. We always benefit from you. And there's no doubt you are going to visit South Africa and Cape Town shortly. I'm working on something with one of the CEOs of one of the colleges here, Sheikh Saadullah Khan. And we really want to get you here when things clear up after this pandemic. So keep us in your prayers. You are in our prayers. We benefit so much from you. I really want to mention something. Something that caught my attention was the question on feminism and woman empowerment. And your response was brilliant. We can't think of everything at the same time, but what came to mind was just Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. And I think many of us miss the point that she was in fact a businesswoman. She owned her own business and she employed the Prophet to work for her, to make a profit for her. And she proposed to him. And later on, she's the first person to accept his message. And all these things are found in that woman who earned the title Al-Kubra, the Great, Khadija the Great. And that should be a standard for all of us, that a woman has, Islam encourages that business, that she can employ people. And I would go so far as to say she can send a proposal over. I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get in for saying that, but we find that happening. The Prophet was, she received.
You forgot one thing though,
Yeah,
which
Sheikh.
is that she was an angel investor in Islam. If Islam was a startup, she is the first person. She spent on the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ for the first several years. So she is also an angel investor.
So we'll add that, an angel investor, and I think I'm going to prepare a post for that and add 0.6 there, that she's an angel investor. Thank you once again, Ya Sayyidi Shaykh, for
Barakallahu fikum.
empowering us, enlightening us. It's we were taught just to look at the ulama through scholars. It's a blessing, it's a barakah, and we can all feel that tranquility just being in your presence, and we'll do this again soon.
Inshallah.
So we ask you to make a dua for us, a short dua, and then we'll conclude.
Allah, we ask you with all your beautiful names and your beautiful attributes, may you protect us and gather us always in your remembrance. May you make us people of the Quran and people of the Sunnah. May we gather under the banner of the Prophet ﷺ on the final hour. May we be fortunate enough to drink from his blessed hands a sip of water, after which we will have no thirst or anxiety, and enter us into your blessed paradise with the shuhada and with the siddiqeen. آمين 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 والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.